Fraud is never just one person's secret. It's an organism. It adapts, defends itself, and feeds on silence. After the coffee meeting, I knew two things for certain. Richard wasn't the mastermind. And whoever was pulling the strings wanted me to believe I'd already won. That's how control works. You let your enemy think he's free, while you trace every step he takes. The day after, I went dark. New SIM card. Fresh email alias. Laptop scrubbed with encrypted firmware. I wasn't running, I was erasing my trail. Then I started digging again. Not in the audit records, those were already compromised, but in the shadow ledgers, the secondary financial statements companies send to external contractors for compliance. They're not public. Not even board members see them. But I knew where to look. Each record came from a different shell vendor: Silverlight Management, Northbridge Consulting, Atlas HR Solutions. On paper, they were unrelated. But the metadata told another story. The documents were created by the same software license, the same corporate user key. Registered under Midland Equity Holdings. Midland wasn't our parent company. It wasn't even in the same industry. It was a global fund manager, one that quietly owned minority shares in hundreds of corporations. And that's when the puzzle clicked into place. Silverlight wasn't a fraud, it was a funnel. Money flowed through our company into Midland subsidiaries, disguised as consultancy fees. Richard wasn't stealing for himself. He was keeping the cycle running for the people who owned everything. Have you ever realized the villain you hated was just another employee? My stomach tightened. If this was real, it meant every accusation, every firing, every budget cut across multiple firms was part of a single operation, a massive laundering network hidden under the language of corporate efficiency. I built a chart, dozens of arrows connecting names, accounts, and timestamps. It looked like chaos, until I noticed the symmetry. Every flow of money curved back to the same offshore branch in Geneva. Recipient, Midland Equity Holdings, Branch 14G. And beneath that, a name, Board Liaison, Ruiz. Anna. My former supervisor. The one who hugged me on my last day and whispered, "You deserved better." The world tilted. My hands froze above the keyboard. Anna wasn't just aware of the fraud, she was managing it. What would you do if the only person who ever showed you kindness turned out to be the one who betrayed you? I checked her LinkedIn. Still active. Promoted recently, Director of Strategic Partnerships. A fancy way to say she connects the dots the rest of us aren't supposed to see. I remembered the night she called me too honest for corporate life. Maybe that was her warning. Or maybe it was her confession. Either way, I had to know. At midnight, I called Tom. He picked up on the third ring, half asleep. "Ethan. What's going on?" "I found something," I said. "Bigger than Richard." He laughed weakly. "Bigger than the CFO." "You're kidding." "No. He's just a cog." The machine's called Midland. I heard him exhale slowly. "Midland. They manage our pension funds." "Exactly," I said. "They own everything, including us." He went silent. Then, almost whispering, "So, who do you expose? The company or the system that built it?" I didn't answer. Because that's the question that destroys people, not can you tell the truth, but will the truth even matter if the entire machine depends on the lie? By 2 a.m., my apartment looked like a crime investigation board, papers taped to the walls, strings connecting continents. Lena, the journalist, messaged me. "Got your audio file. It's good. But it's not enough. We need the head of the snake." The head. That meant Anna. But if I exposed her, I'd also expose myself, every illegal login, every file I touched after being terminated. She'd go down, and so would I. Still, I started drafting an anonymous brief. Internal corruption and laundering mechanism, Midland equity structure. A 47-page document that mapped the entire web. Every transaction, every executive, every ghost company. When I was done, I read the first line out loud. This is not a leak. It's a confession. And for the first time, I meant it. The next morning, as dawn crept across the blinds, I received a new message from an unknown sender. Subject, stop. No text. Just a single image attachment. It was a photo of my apartment building. Taken from across the street. No watermark. No timestamp. Just silence. I stared at it for a long time. They weren't warning me anymore. They were watching. I turned off the laptop, unplugged the router, and whispered to myself. You're in their web now. But fear didn't come this time. Only resolve. Because if they wanted to watch, they'd see exactly what I wanted them to see. I packed a small bag, laptop, USB, printed dossier, and walked out as the city began to wake. Somewhere behind me, a black sedan pulled from the curb. Engine steady. Following. I didn't look back. Because you can't outrun a web. You dismantle it, thread by thread. If you discovered that the system you worked for was built on corruption, would you try to fix it, or burn it down? As the sun climbed over the skyline, I made my choice. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about exposure. And I was done hiding in the shadows of their spreadsheets. The ghosts weren't just in the numbers now. They were in the faces of every person who looked away. And soon, they'd all see what I'd seen. Threats never arrive with thunder. They come in whispers, short, precise, designed to sound like coincidence. It started the next morning. The world outside looked normal. Sunlight bouncing off glass towers, the smell of burnt espresso from the cafe downstairs, the rhythm of a city too busy to care. But normal is just camouflage. When I opened my email, there it was. No sender name. No subject line. Just one sentence. Stop digging, or the next cut won't be from the budget. I read it twice. Then a third time, slower, waiting for the fear to hit. It didn't. I'd been expecting this, not the exact words, but the shape of the warning. Silence is fragile. The moment you break it, the system retaliates. Still, it meant they knew. Not just what I'd found, but that I wasn't working alone anymore. I checked the locks, drew the curtains, and powered up the encrypted drive. My files were intact. My backup secure. But the real danger wasn't digital, it was physical. Someone had taken that photo of my building. That meant they were close. Have you ever felt watched, not by a person, but by something larger, something patient? I tried to call Tom. No answer. Then Maria. Disconnected. 2 names, gone from the grid. That's when I realized, they weren't just watching me. They were cleaning again. I grabbed my coat, stuffed the USB and dossier into my bag, and left the apartment. The street was crowded, perfect cover. Every sound, every face, every reflection in the glass felt sharper, like the city had turned into surveillance. I walked toward the river, turned left onto 3rd Avenue, then crossed at a red light just to see who'd follow. No one obvious. But when I glanced at a car mirror, a black sedan idled half a block behind. Not fast. Not hiding. Just there. I ducked into a bookstore, then slipped through the back exit. Old habit. Still worked. Inside the alley, the air smelled of oil and rain. I leaned against the wall and finally exhaled. My phone buzzed again, a new message. This one from an unknown number, untraceable. Delete everything, Ethan. It's not just your life they'll take. And then, below it, a photo. Tom. Standing outside his small apartment, looking over his shoulder. Blurry, zoomed in, taken from a distance. I stared at it, jaw tightening. The threat wasn't against me anymore. They wanted to make me responsible. That night, I drove to the edge of the city, to an empty parking lot overlooking the docks. It's where Tom and I used to grab late-night drinks after work. Now it was just me, the sound of waves hitting concrete, and the taste of salt in the air. I opened the USB drive, the same one that started all this, and hovered over the delete key. For a moment, I imagined the relief. No more hiding. No more fear. Just peace. But peace bought with silence isn't peace. It's surrender. So I backed up the files again. Twice. And then I did something reckless. I sent a fragment of the data, one invoice, one proof of the fraud, to Lena, the journalist. No explanation. Just the subject line. They're watching. Her reply came 15 minutes later. Good. Let them. Send the rest when you're ready. There it was, courage from someone who hadn't lived the fear. But I needed that kind of bravery. I'd run out of mine. When I returned home, the air felt wrong. The doorknob was warm, the lock slightly misaligned. Inside, everything looked untouched, almost too untouched. My laptop was still on the table. Screen dark. Camera light faintly blinking. They'd been inside. I checked the USB, still there. But the folder structure was altered. A new file had appeared, finalnotice.txt. I opened it. We warned you. One last chance, midnight tomorrow. Stop, or your story ends first. Below it, a GPS coordinate. It pointed to the warehouse district by the river. A message and an invitation. They wanted me to come. If the people who ruined your life asked you to meet in the dark, would you go? I closed the laptop. No hesitation this time. Fear had done its job. Now it was motivation. If they wanted a confrontation, they'd get one. On my terms. I printed duplicates of the dossier, sealed them in 3 envelopes, and dropped them in random mailboxes across the city, addressed to Lena and 2 anonymous watchdog groups. Insurance, the kind that activates when you're gone. Then I packed light, 1 recorder, 1 backup drive, and a pocket knife. Not for defense, for control. Because when you're inside the system, control is the only weapon left. At 11:45 p.m., I stood at the riverfront. The fog was thick, rolling between the warehouses like slow smoke. A single light glowed inside one of the buildings, the coordinates from the message. I took a deep breath and stepped forward. You wanted me here, I whispered. Now let's finish it. Somewhere inside, a door creaked open. They wanted to scare me. Instead, they made me certain. If I walked out alive, I'd burn the whole network to the ground. And if I didn't, the world would already have the evidence. Either way, the silence was over. Some explosions don't make a sound. They happen in inboxes, boardrooms, and live-streamed shareholder calls. That's how the truth spreads, not in fire, but in data. When the story broke, it didn't come from me. It came from everywhere. At 8:12 a.m. on a Tuesday, the Ledger-Times published an anonymous exposé titled, "The Ghost in the Balance Sheet, $9 million of Nothing." By 8:17, the company's stock froze. By 8:23, Richard's photo was trending with the hashtag budget cuts. And by 8:30, the board of directors called an emergency meeting. I didn't need an invitation to attend, I had a link. Every employee had access to the quarterly shareholder stream, and someone, maybe Brian from IT, made sure I still had a backdoor. So I watched it from a coffee shop downtown, earbuds in, hood up, espresso going cold. Richard looked like a statue cracking under the heat of lights and questions. Reporters filled the hall, their recorders lit like tiny red eyes. The chairwoman spoke first. Mr. Matthews, are you aware of allegations linking company funds to offshore vendors? He smiled, tight, measured. I am aware of certain claims. They are false and defamatory. The screen behind him flashed. A slide appeared, not one of his. It was the first page of the whistleblower dossier. My file. Every signature, every invoice, every arrow I had drawn connecting names and numbers was projected for the world to see. Gasps cut through the room. One board member stood. Who uploaded this? Richard froze. Because he knew the answer. I did. Through the trigger program I'd buried weeks ago, the moment someone tried to alter the audit database, the file auto-forwarded to the public server. He tried to delete me. Instead, he broadcast me. Have you ever watched a liar realize the room no longer believes him? Richard cleared his throat. These documents are fabricated. But another screen blinked alive beside him. A video window. His voice, from the coffee shop recording. Silverlight isn't my creation. It's older, bigger than me. The boardroom erupted. Phones flashed, people stood, security moved toward him. And for the first time, Richard looked small. The chairwoman leaned forward. Mr. Matthews, please remain seated. Compliance has been contacted. Richard turned to someone off camera. Get Anna on the line. Now. Anna Ruiz. The real puppeteer. Her name hanging in the air was the moment the machine began to eat itself. Outside, the coffee shop noise blurred into white sound, cups clinking, voices rising, a city living its own routine while a corporation bled out in real time. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt empty. Revenge was supposed to taste sweet. It tasted like burnt coffee and regret. Because for every Richard falling, there were hundreds like him still in other rooms, telling new lies. Hours later, I walked past the company's headquarters. Reporters crowded the steps, microphones everywhere. A voice on the radio said the board had suspended the entire executive team pending investigation. Richard was escorted out through the side door, hand covering his face. No one helped him. The machine was discarding a broken gear. Do you ever wonder how quickly loyalty turns to distance when the spotlight shifts? I watched from across the street, hood pulled low. No one knew the man who started the fire was standing right there. But not everyone in that building was innocent. Anna Ruiz had vanished. Her office was cleared out before security arrived. Email deactivated, files wiped. Gone. The real architect of the web, off the grid before the system collapsed. That night, Lena called. They're calling it the Silverlight scandal, she said. It's everywhere. The Department of Finance opened an investigation. Your dossier changed everything. I stared out my window, city lights flickering like binary code. Do they know it was me? I asked. Not yet. But they will. Then let them. Silence hung between us, respect and warning mixed together. You did the right thing, she said finally. Right things never stay right for long, I replied. At midnight, the board issued a public statement. We condemn the actions of individuals involved in financial misconduct and affirm our commitment to transparency. corporate language for "we got caught." But buried at the bottom of the release was one sentence that made my blood run cold. Midland Equity Holdings has volunteered to oversee the company's restructuring process. The web was already repairing itself. They'd lost a CFO but kept their machine. Midland, Anna's network, was now officially in charge. What do you call a victory when the enemy just changes its name? I closed the laptop, heart steady but heavy. They thought they were silencing me by replacing Richard with new faces. But I'd already planted seeds elsewhere, copies of files in government inboxes, offshore press servers, and open-source forums set to release in phases. This wasn't the end. It was just the public version of the story, the one they could contain. The real truth was still beneath the numbers, waiting to surface when the next trigger activated. I looked at the USB on my desk, the same small, black device that started everything. One more backup. One more insurance file. And then I whispered. You can replace the faces, but you can't replace the facts. The screen of my laptop went dark, reflecting my own shadow back at me. In the distance, sirens wailed, not of chaos, but of correction. For now. Because systems don't collapse in a day. They rot quietly, from the inside out. And I was still inside. Audits aren't just about numbers. They're about fear. Every click, every file, every signature becomes evidence, or ammunition. By the end of the week, the company wasn't a business anymore. It was a crime scene. Government inspectors, forensic accountants, and lawyers in dark suits filled the building like a silent invasion. Every office sealed, every laptop tagged, every drive cloned. Even the walls seemed to hum with electricity, the sound of servers being ripped apart. The headlines called it the Silverlight Collapse. Employees called it the Purge. And me? I just called it expected. I watched it unfold from a distance, the news feeds, the leaked footage of investigators walking out with boxes marked evidence. For the first time, I didn't need to imagine justice. It was on live television. But justice isn't clean. It doesn't arrive like redemption, it drags everything with it. By the third day, the storm turned. The media started asking questions I hadn't prepared for. Who was the whistleblower? Was this an inside job? Could this be corporate espionage? The narrative was shifting, from what they did to who exposed them. And in corporate warfare, those questions are fatal. Have you ever watched a truth you fought for start turning against you? That night, I received a call from Lena. Her voice was sharper than usual. Ethan, they're digging into the source. The company's lawyers subpoenaed the Ledger Times for IP data linked to the leak. So they're trying to find me. They're more than trying, she said. They've hired private investigators. Someone inside's feeding them names, yours included. I didn't speak for a moment. I'd expected consequences. Just not so soon. She continued, you need to disappear for a while. I'll handle the press. Disappear? I said quietly. I spent 10 years being invisible. I'm done hiding. Then at least be careful. These people don't lose quietly. The line went dead. The next morning, the storm had a new target, me. A headline flashed across every news site. Anonymous whistleblower, maybe former employee fired for misconduct. They were rewriting history, and I was the villain. My inbox flooded with messages, some congratulating me, others calling me a traitor. And somewhere between those two extremes, I started to lose track of which side I was on. I'd set the truth free, but the system was already bending it. Meanwhile, the auditors kept digging. The Department of Finance confirmed over $12 million had been laundered through Silverlight and its shell companies. More files were discovered, not just from my company, but 5 others under the same Midland network. It was global now. A chain reaction. I thought it would bring relief. Instead, it brought silence. Because when fraud becomes too big to punish, it stops being called fraud. They call it market correction. At noon, my doorbell rang. I froze. Through the peephole, two men in dark suits, badges half visible. "Mr. Cole," one of them said. "We're with the Financial Crimes Division. We'd like to ask you a few questions." Their tone wasn't hostile, not yet, but something about it felt rehearsed. Like they weren't there to protect me. They were there to measure me. I opened the door halfway. "Of course," I said. "Can I see your credentials?" They showed them. Real. But authenticity doesn't guarantee trust. They asked about the USB drive, the files, the anonymous dossier. How I got the data, who helped me leak it, whether I was aware of potential breaches of cybersecurity law. The irony wasn't lost on me. I exposed the theft, and now I was being treated like the thief. I told them the truth, or enough of it to survive. They took notes, nodded, and left. No threats. No handcuffs. Just the lingering sense that something had shifted again. By evening, Lena messaged me a photo. It was a screenshot from a private forum. A user under the alias a.ruiz_14 had posted a statement. The so-called whistleblower fabricated documents to frame an innocent team. The real investigation will prove this was an act of corporate sabotage. Anna. Alive, online, and rewriting the story. She was still moving the pieces, from the shadows, like always. What do you do when the person who built the lie starts telling your truth better than you can? I stared at her message until the screen dimmed. Then I laughed, quietly, bitterly. Of course she'd survive. People like Anna always do. Because systems don't protect truth-tellers. They protect architects. The next morning, I walked past a newsstand. Front page headline. Midland Equity to oversee compliance of multiple firms. They'd done it again, turned disaster into promotion. Richard was gone. Anna was invisible. And I was the story they'd already started to bury. I stood there for a long time, the city moving around me like a tide I no longer belonged to. Then I whispered to myself. Let them clean up. I'm not done yet. Because storms don't destroy everything. They reveal what was weak to begin with. And somewhere inside the wreckage, I still had the one thing they couldn't control. The next trigger. A file scheduled to release in 72 hours. One that tied Midland Equity directly to offshore accounts in Geneva and Singapore. Anna's signature was on every document. I closed my eyes and smiled faintly. The storm wasn't over. It was just changing direction. If the truth cost you your name, your safety, and your peace, would you still press send? The cursor blinked on my screen. I hovered over the upload button. And for the first time, I didn't hesitate. A month after the storm, the building looked the same, glass walls, mirror doors, the same cold marble lobby echoing with polished footsteps. But everything else had changed. The company had a new name now. New logo, new mission statement, same ghosts. I stood on the sidewalk across the street, watching employees pass through the revolving doors like nothing had happened. It was almost poetic, the system rebuilding itself, pretending to heal. And then my phone buzzed. A message from an unfamiliar number. Ethan Cole. We'd like to discuss a consulting position. Integrity and Compliance Division. I laughed, the kind of laugh that feels like a wound reopening. Integrity. The same word they used in their internal code of ethics, right before they buried the truth. Still, I went. Not out of forgiveness. Out of curiosity. The HR office was exactly where I remembered, third floor, left of the elevator, glass panels that made everyone look exposed. A woman in a gray suit greeted me with a smile too polite to be sincere. "Mr. Cole, thank you for coming. The board appreciates your contribution." Contribution. That's what they called it now, the data leak that gutted their leadership and exposed a multinational crime ring. She led me into a smaller conference room. And there he was. Richard Matthews. Not behind bars. Not disgraced. Just thinner, quieter, older. He looked at me with the kind of smile you practice in mirrors before facing the press. "Ethan," he said softly. "It's been a while." I didn't answer. I just sat down. He nodded toward the folder in front of him. "The board has reviewed your findings. They want to rebuild. From the inside." I almost laughed again. "And you want me to help you do it? I want you to make sure it never happens again. Would you step back into the place that destroyed you, if they handed you the keys?" For a long moment, I said nothing. Then I asked, "Why me?" Richard leaned forward. "Because no one else can. You understand how it works, the system, the people, the cover-ups. You saw it all." "And what about Anna?" His jaw tightened. "She's gone. Midland severed ties. Her trail ended in Singapore." I studied his face, calm, but hollow. He wasn't lying. He was exhausted. The machine had chewed him up too. I opened the folder. Inside, a contract, a badge, and a title. Consultant for Corporate Integrity. The irony was almost beautiful. They fired me for budget cuts. Now they were paying me to fix the damage they'd done. I closed the folder. "I'll think about it," I said. He nodded, relief flickering in his eyes. "Of course. Just know this, the world doesn't reward martyrs. It hires survivors." I stood, looking out the window. The skyline shimmered like a sheet of glass ready to crack. "Survivors," I repeated quietly. "Maybe that's all any of us ever are." Then I left. Outside, the air felt different, sharper, cleaner. But as I walked past the revolving doors, I caught my reflection in the glass. And for a second, I didn't recognize the man staring back. Not the fired analyst. Not the whistleblower. Something in between. Someone who'd learned that truth and power speak the same language, numbers. That evening, I sat in a cafe across from the building. The same cafe where I once sat watching the board meeting collapse. I opened my laptop, connected to a secure network, and checked the timer on the final trigger file. Release scheduled, 17 hours. The last backup, the one tying Midland equity directly to 2 government accounts. I could stop it. Delete it. Let the world believe the story was over. I hovered over the command key. Then a voice behind me said, "You shouldn't be here." I turned. Brian, the IT technician who'd helped me trace the first data trail. He looked nervous, glancing around before sitting. "They're rebuilding faster than we thought," he whispered. "Midland's funding a new compliance division, under a different name." "Of course they are," I said. "That's what parasites do. They adapt." He leaned closer. "But this time, they're using your report as their blueprint. They're turning your investigation into their business model." I smiled faintly. They always learn the wrong lesson. What do you do when the system starts profiting from your rebellion? Brian swallowed hard. "So what now?" I closed the laptop slowly. "Now," I said, "we make sure they don't get to rewrite it again." He looked confused. "What do you mean?" I opened the encrypted drive, tapped one key, and confirmed the upload. The progress bar began to move. 15%, 48%, 73%. Ethan, he said quietly. What did you do? Just telling the rest of the story. The final file was set to go public at dawn, evidence of Midland's new shadow operations, Anna's resurfaced digital footprint, and connections to several international regulators. When it reached 100%, I closed the lid. No alarms. No noise. Just the faint hum of inevitability. Because truth doesn't need fireworks. It just needs timing. As I stepped out into the night, the city lights shimmered against the wet pavement. I passed the building one last time. Through the glass, I saw Richard standing in the lobby, talking to a cluster of executives. He looked up, maybe sensing something, a flicker of recognition, or dread. Our eyes met for one brief second. I nodded once. Not in forgiveness, in farewell. Then I kept walking. The truth was no longer mine. It belonged to everyone now. They could rebuild, rebrand, or rename. But the cracks were already there. And no audit, no compliance team, no press release would ever seal them again. If you had the chance to walk back into the place that broke you, would you rebuild it, or leave it burning? I didn't look back to find out. Because some ghosts belong in the numbers. And some finally learn to live outside them. They say every story ends when justice is served. But justice isn't an ending. It's a pause, a brief silence before the next lie begins. The morning after the final upload, the world woke up to noise. Headlines, alerts, and disbelief. The data I'd released was everywhere, government accounts, media servers, even college ethics boards. Thousands of pages tying Midland equity to international money laundering. And Ana Ruiz's name was on every signature line. The leak spread faster than even I expected. Not because people cared about corruption, but because they cared about spectacle. Scandal sells better than truth. I didn't watch the news that morning. I didn't need to. The sound of it was already in the air, the static of panic traveling through a city that had learned to monetize every downfall. At noon, my phone rang. Lena. They're calling it the largest financial whistleblowing case of the decade, she said. You did it, Ethan. No, I said quietly. The numbers did. There was a pause on the line. She understood. Are you ready to go public? She asked. That question hung in the air like smoke. Public. The word that once meant vindication now sounded like exposure. Would you tell your story if you knew the world would twist it into something else? I looked out the window. Across the street, the company's new sign still gleamed under morning light, clean, confident, deceitful. They'd already rebranded. They always do. I'll speak, I said finally. But not to defend myself. That afternoon, the board held a press conference. They called it a statement on integrity and the future. A phrase so polished it barely meant anything. I watched from the back of the crowded room, unannounced. Richard stood behind the podium again, flanked by lawyers and PR managers. The irony almost made me laugh. The man they fired for budget cuts was now their symbol of reform. He began reading from a script. We recognize the mistakes of the past. Moving forward, we are committed to transparency, accountability. The words blurred. All corporate apologies sound the same. Empty confessions written by committees, washed clean of guilt. Then the moderator announced, "We'll take one final question." I raised my hand. Dozens of heads turned. Richard's voice faltered mid-sentence when he saw me. Mr. Cole. Yes, I said evenly. Ethan Cole. Former senior financial analyst. Fired for budget cuts. The room went silent. Every camera turned. Every phone started recording. I stepped forward, voice calm. I just want to say one thing. I paused long enough for every journalist to lean in. They fired me for budget cuts, I said. I just helped them cut the right people. For a moment, no one breathed. Then the flashes began, a storm of light, sound, and questions. But I didn't stay for answers. I'd already said everything that mattered. Outside, the winter wind bit sharp against my skin. The street buzzed with voices, reporters shouting, traffic roaring, people trying to turn my words into headlines. But I wasn't listening anymore. The truth was out. Not perfect, not complete, but enough. Enough to scar the machine, even if it kept moving. Enough to make them afraid again. I walked down the street, past the same cafe where it all began. Where Richard once smiled over espresso and told me to move on. Now, the tables were full of interns and executives whispering about crisis management, risk analysis, brand recovery. They still hadn't learned. They never would. How do you destroy something that survives by pretending to learn from its mistakes? You don't. You just make sure its mask keeps cracking in public. Weeks passed. Investigations deepened. Midland's assets froze. Governments debated jurisdiction while lawyers feasted on the carcass of greed. Anna Ruiz was still missing. Rumors said she'd fled to Dubai, others said she was in custody under a different name. But ghosts don't get arrested, they just move banks. As for me, I stopped running. I rented a small office on the east side, nothing fancy, just a desk, a computer, and a lock on the door. People started coming to me with stories. Employees cheated out of pensions, analysts silenced after audits, whistleblowers without protection. I listened. I archived. And quietly, I built a new kind of database, one that no company could own, no government could bury. I called it Project Ledger. Not for money. For memory. Because corruption doesn't fear exposure, it fears documentation. Once something's written, it stops being deniable. One evening, Lena stopped by with 2 coffees. She looked at the chaos of papers and screens around me and smiled. "You're still doing it," she said. "Doing what?" "Counting ghosts." I smiled back. "Someone has to." She raised her cup. "To the ghosts." "To the numbers," I said. We clinked the cups together. Later that night, when she left, I sat alone at the desk and opened a blank document. At the top, I typed, "Final statement." Then I began to write, not for headlines, not for revenge, but for the record. The system didn't break. It was built this way. And every time someone calls it corruption, they're only describing it accurately. I paused, listening to the hum of the city beyond the window. The same hum I'd heard on the day they fired me. It hadn't changed. But I had. I wrote one last line, closed the file, and locked it behind encrypted code only I could access. Then I whispered to the empty room. Truth isn't noise. It's persistence. Outside, dawn began to rise, the color of spreadsheets and steel. Somewhere, another company was preparing another lie. And I smiled softly, knowing that somewhere in their numbers, a new ghost was already waiting.